Well, as we get closer to the regular season start, just who has impressed you the most come camp and through the first two preseason games so far?
That's a tough question. Obviously the guys that are going to stand out are the star level players. Like I think Adam Fox has looked awesome. I think Keandre Miller has looked awesome. I think Igor Shesterkin to me has looked sharp in camp. And I think the mental fortitude that I'm sensing from him is so much improved from what we saw from him last year. He was really, I think, not in a great place for a lot of the season, just in dealing with him in the locker room, very distant. Didn't want to do many interviews, but also I didn't see him really interacting with his teammates very much. He was very frustrated at times, I think, and it was evident on the ice. You'd see him in a practice setting slamming his stick on the crossbar or just reacting very harshly to giving up a goal or a play that he didn't like. And it just seemed like he was really beating himself up, being too hard on himself. And this camp, the vibes around him have been much different. And he was open about it. I give him credit because last year, I think he didn't really want to talk about it. But this year, when we got a chance to sit down with him earlier on in camp, he spoke a lot about the lessons that he learned last year and realizing that you can't let yourself get that frustrated. Of course, he's driven to be great. I think one of the most driven players on this team. And that's going to mean that you're going to be hard on yourself and you're going to demand a lot out of yourself. But you can't take it home with you all the time. You can't let it linger or, if you sleep on it and show up at the rink the next day and you're still pissed off, that's not necessarily going to be a recipe for success. So I think he's just maturing in a way where now he's realizing like, okay, I have to be able to turn the page in certain situations in order to make sure that I'm focused in the right way for the task at hand the following day. And so if Igor can be the Igor that we saw 2 seasons ago or anything close to it, which I think we saw at the end of the season last year, that's obviously, I think, probably the best sign that you could see for the Rangers. So obviously I'm naming some pretty obvious guys here. I think among the young guys, I talked about it a little bit, Cooley is really making a good impression at this camp. And I think unlikely to make the team because they're not going to keep him as a 13th forward. And I think the other 12 spots are pretty much locked in as far as who's going to be in the lineup. But in the event of an injury or the event that they need to plug someone into that top 12 who's going to actually be in the lineup every night, I think he's positioning himself as the next guy in line. And I even saw Laviolette with him during practice today, joking. Like you could tell that there's some good vibes going on between those two right now. So Cooley is a guy who's made a good impression on me. A little more under the radar, but Mac Hollowell, a right-handed defenseman the Rangers signed for depth purposes. Another guy who's not going to make this roster unless something unforeseen happens out of camp. But I do think as a depth piece, he's also the next man up. If something happens to Fox or Trouba or Schneider, Hollowell's probably going to be the guy who gets the call. And Peter Laviolette has been raving about him so far in this camp. I'm sure there's other names that can come up on top of my head. Pitlick is a guy who I think got some speed to him. Big dude who can skate, got better hands and a little more skill than I anticipated. So I think that looks like it could be a nice depth signing for the Rangers and a useful fourth line piece. So he's a guy that stood out to me a little bit. Even though he's gone now, I mentioned this on my podcast yesterday, Bryce McConnell-Barker is really improving. I think clearly the number one center prospect in the organization. He's going to play in the OHL this season. He's not an option for the Rangers, still very young, but I think his progress is something to be excited about. Those are just a few of the names that pop into my head. I'm sure there's others I'm forgetting, but yeah, I mean, those fringy guys, I think, are some of the most interesting to watch at this point of the year.
If you mentioned Hollowell being the next guy up on that blue line, just what does that mean for Zach Jones's future with the Rangers?
Well, I'm talking about right side. I think Zach Jones is definitely making this roster, even though I don't think he's had an outstanding camp. If I'm being honest with you, the Rangers are not, I repeat, not going to risk placing him on waivers. That's not only my own logic. I've heard that from sources as well. So their plan, my full understanding, is that it will be to keep Jones on this roster, likely as a 7th defenseman, because I think Eric Gustafsson is clearly going to be ahead of him as far as who gets in the lineup and who plays on that bottom pair next to Braden Schneider. But Jones will be on this roster simply because same situation we saw with Vitaly Kravtsov last year. You're not going to take a valuable prospect and expose him to waivers and let any other team that wants to claim him for free. Now, is a trade a possibility? Yes, I absolutely believe that a trade is a possibility when it comes to Zach Jones, because I don't think that there's any clear path for him into the lineup unless an injury happens or Gustafsson completely falls flat. But Gustafsson has a good relationship with Laviolette, had one of his best seasons last year in Washington under Laviolette, and he was signed with the full intention of playing. So Jones is kind of the odd man out right now, but I think he's going to make the roster. And if somebody were to get injured, he'd be the first guy up. They've also worked him a little bit on the right side in this camp. So it looks like they would try him on either side. I think he's the first man up as far as the seventh defenseman goes, but I think Hollowell is next on the depth chart if you're just talking about right-handed guys.
Awesome. Well, Vince Mercogliano, thank you very much for joining Forever Blue Shirts. We appreciate the time.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.